Hey everybody, Tekking101 here. Want to see a card trick? Okay, well, keep your eyes on the prize, because this is going to go fast. I need you to pick one card out of these deck, and what you're going to... Okay, so as you could probably tell, I'm not that great at card tricks, but that's okay, because today we're only talking about two cards in particular, the King and the Queen. Or if you want to crank up that weeb dial a little bit, it's the Kingu and the Killer Queen! I'm sure something explodified in the area around me. I'll figure it out later. But, yes, okay, so in chapter 925 of One Piece, Oda drops some nice, steamy, hot news on our laps. Yeah. Don't you love it when he does that? Okay, so we got Blackbeard's New World design. We got Katarina Devon having the mythical nine-tailed fox zone. We had Shiryu obtaining Absalom Suke no Mi, the clear fruit. And to cap it all off, to end out the chapter, Oda reveals the other calamities or all-stars in the Beast Pirates lineup. We have King, the Fire, Wildfire, Conflagration, whatever. And then we had Queen, the Plague. So, in this video, we're just going to talk about possibilities of what their devil fruits could be, because here's the thing. We know King, just out of the gate. We know he has some kind of mythical zone, and I can tell you the reason for that. I can tell you my reasoning. It's pretty sound, okay? So, in the Kaido, in Kaido's entourage, in the Beast Pirates lineup, so far, it's always been zones. It's either the artificial zones, the smiles, which are given to the gifters and the headliners. Sometimes you'll have an exception to this, like Hawkins as a headliner. He doesn't have a zone, but he was introduced beforehand, okay? This was, he joined up with the Beast Pirates later. But all the other pirates that have been introduced that are part of Kaido's entourage, all the other headliners and the gifters and the pleasures and the disasters and all that stuff, and Kaido himself, they've all been zone fruits, okay? So, and considering he's Kaido of the Beast, and it's the Beast Pirates, I can assume we're gonna keep with that theme, okay? And so we had Jack, who had an ancient zone. It was the mammoth fruit, the ancient variety of the Zozo fruit, or the elephant fruit, right? And his epithet was Jack the Drought, because he would just turn into a giant mammoth and then just appear and then stomp out the greenery or your fields, and so nothing could grow there anymore. They would burn your town down so nothing could happen. And so basically just absolute destruction. It was in his wake, okay? So then we get introduced to Queen and to King. And it would be fair to reason that they would have zone powers as well. I was under the assumption that all of the calamities were going to have ancient zone powers, and then you were going to have Kaido with the mythical zone. He was going to be kind of at the apex of all of it. The only thing that kind of throws a wrench into that, though, is that King very clearly had, like, fire erupting from his back during his introduction. He also had a pair of wings, but you could chalk that up to anything. Honestly, his appearance strikes a remarkable similarity to the Guards and Magellan and Impel Down. It's the same basic suit. He's even got the same little skull lapels that Shiryu has. Now, Shiryu didn't get those until after he defected from Impel Down, but he still ended up getting them, so it's a little weird. Impel Down basically seemed to inspire Shiryu's costume choice a lot, because even after 2 years of leaving the prison, he still wears the same basic outfit, just decked out with some different jewelry and stuff. And I think even in chapter 925, when we see Shiryu, he's wearing a cloak, and it has the kanji for prison on the back, so it's still very clearly something that he's into. And then so you see King with the same basic outfit, the wings, don't know if the wings are real or not, although they very likely could be, or they could just be decoration, because Magellan had wings on his back, but it's not like he never used them to fly or anything. And on top of that, he's also sort of a sex gimp. He's into some kinky stuff, ladies and gentlemen, because he's all decked out in the tight leather and his mask, and you can't even really see his face. It's just a freaking mask with just eye holes and mouth holes and stuff. And then the fire. So it's not going to be, it can't be a regular zone, it can't be a regular zone. It can't even really be an ancient zone, because their basic thing is just transforming into an animal that does exist or used to exist. Ancient zones are a little bit rarer than normal zones. Maybe you have to find them maybe you have to do Pokemon shit with this. Maybe you have to find the fossil of a zone and then take it to a professor of fossil regeneration on Cinnabar Island, and it's like, okay, here you go, here's your dome fossil. I mean, ancient zone fruit, model Tyrannosaurus Rex. There you go. So there's a process you got to go through. At least it's harder to get an ancient zone. But still, ancient zones don't give you any sort of like mythical or supernatural ability. You turn into a dinosaur or you turn into a mammoth, which I guess. Okay, that is technically a supernatural ability, but you know what I mean. It's not like Jack is going around like, I'm a mammoth, but I can also breathe fire. Or, you know, it's not like X-Drake is going around like, I'm a dinosaur. But my stomach is also a pocket dimension that leads into a separate reality populated entirely by mushrooms. You know, it's like, okay, you're a dinosaur, you're a giant carnivore, scavenger, and then freaking Jack is a giant mammoth, and that's what they're left with, okay? So, if King is gonna have fire coming out of his back, that means he has to have some other ability going on there, which means he's either, you could say he's a Paramecia or a Logia, but I don't think that fits very well with the Beast Pirates' little, you know, design, their layout, so I'm going to go with mythical zone that allows him to control fire. Now, here's the thing with that. We've already had one of those. That was what Marco was. Although his was a little special, Marco had the power of the phoenix fruit, and he could turn into a majestic flying bird. And on top of that, he could also control the flames of resurrection, or the flames of revival. But they weren't exactly the same thing as typical fire. For one thing, they don't burn people. So Marco cannot use his flames for offense. He can't like, I'm gonna throw a fireball at you, Kizaru. It wouldn't work. Even if the fireball hit Kizaru dead on, it wouldn't hurt him, okay? His flames are focused around healing wounds or regenerating limbs if he's using them on himself. You know, even if he gets his arm blasted off, he can just regenerate a limb. He can use his flames of resurrection on other people to just kind of like bolster their normal healing faculties, but it's nothing that can actually like heal, like he can't regenerate lost limbs on other people, but that's the purpose of his fires. So yes, we already had a mythical zone that can control fire, but it's not the exact same thing. We're looking into a mythical zone that can actually breathe the normal kind of fire. The fire that can like, oh my god, my hand's on fire! You know, that kind of fire. Okay. So, I'm a big fan of Greek mythology myself. That's my thing, really. So my mind immediately went to Hephaestus, god of fire, son of Zeus and Hera. Kind of. There's a thing there. It's like, it might be just the asexual offspring of Hera, but the point is, Hephaestus is essentially the Greek god of fire and the forge. So he's like, you know, it's old school. It's old school gods. Okay, so that means you gotta have a blacksmith. Alright, you gotta have somebody that makes your weapons. And hey, this kind of works when you're talking about Kaido's crew, because that's kind of how their whole operation on Wano is shaking down. Building these giant factories that are causing massive amounts of air and water pollution, deforestation, all for the resources of making weapons. Whether it be the weapons in the traditional sense, like swords, spears, guns, cannons, that kind of shit, or you're doing the thing with the artificial devil fruits, the smiles, which maybe they might, I'm imagining they might actually cause some negative health effects either. Like, you cut back to Dressrosa when they were still under the production and the Smile Factory. I can imagine like a runoff of like toxic waste just billowing out of Dressrosa. It's like, man, creating those smiles, it's a lot of work there. Or even with the sad back on Punk Hazard, you know, probably some dangerous runoff there. But yeah, the whole point of the Beast Pirates is they're making weapons. So Hephaestus, god of fire, god of the forge, makes sense there. Now, you know, my mind immediately went to that because, like I said, I'm into that sort of stuff, but hey, you know, that might be going a little bit overkill there, you know, the mythical god fruit, model Hephaestus. But hey, you gotta consider Sengoku, who can turn into the straight-up Buddha. Now, I know the Buddha is not really regarded as a god in the traditional sense. Rather, the Buddha is a human that became enlightened and was able to achieve nirvana. Alright, think of it more like that. That's why Sengoku's fruit is referred to as the human fruit, mythical variant, the Buddha model. You know, that's what that's referred to as. We haven't exactly gotten into the point yet where Oda is introducing mythical zones that turn you into a straight up, like, actual deity. Okay, like, we haven't seen, like, the god fruit. You know, model Zeus, model Thor, model Odin, you know, whatever your god of choice is. We haven't seen that yet. Is he ever gonna do that? I would probably say no. With maybe one exception, and we're gonna get into that when we get to Queen, because Queen's plague epithet, I've come up with, going into some research. I have an idea for that one, which is kind of... Do you guys consider the Grim Reaper a god? I'm just gonna come out and say it, I'm gonna bring it up later in the video after we're done with King, but yeah, you can see where I'm going with that. But first, let's get through Kings first. Okay, so we're not talking about a straight-up deity. So goodbye Hephaestus, goodbye Svarog. It's an Eastern European Slavic god that's also kind of the same thing as Hephaestus. God of the forge, heat incarnate, that sort of thing. Also known as a sky deity in some respects. Svarog. So yeah, it's the same basic deal as Hephaestus, though. He's a straight-up deity. So let's push them off to the side here. So something else that people have brought up, and I didn't think about this immediately, but I am a fan of Black Clover, so I was aware of this. How about the salamander? Okay, so the salamander, like when I was talking about the Ninetales video, and allow me to clarify something really quick here. In the Ninetales video, I meant to say it, but I just didn't get around to it. The tanuki, the raccoon dog, yeah, that's a real animal. Okay, some people were confused by that. I was like, wait, is the tanuki like a real animal? It is a real animal. It's like, yes, it is. The same as a fox. It's just that these animals have had kind of like, they've gained like supernatural status over centuries, where all this lore was written about them and all the things that they represent and they're symbolic of, they kind of took it on over the years. So yeah, fox is sort of regarded in a certain way, like, oh yeah, that's the nine-tailed fox. The fox will become very old and ascend into godhood. And yes, the tanuki is it's an animal that exists, doesn't have any supernatural properties, but in Japanese and Chinese lore, it's able to transform into various objects, okay? Same thing with the salamander. The salamander is a real animal. Look at the guy, he's a little cutie. Aw, look at the little salamanders. He just wants to be your oh no! God, it's scary. But it's also taken on a whole new meaning in terms of supernatural, mythical creatures, because the salamander is pretty much well known as some type of fire elemental, an animal that can either channel fire, summon it, or at least at the very minimum be resistant to fire. And I actually found a reason for this, and it's actually kind of hilarious. This is one of the things you look into when you do research on these mythical creatures, like, how did the fox attain this mythical status? Did a human just get drunk once and was like seeing the fox, and his vision was a little blurry, and he saw the fox had 9 tails, and the fox jumped on top of a tree, but from the perspective of the drunk guy, he jumped right into the sun, and so he's like, guys, I saw a fox with 9 tails jump into heaven. You wonder how this stuff actually started, like who was the first person to come up with this. But the salamander thing is hilarious, so allow me to tell you this. It probably came about because back in the old days, how do you get heat in your house, or your hut, or your hovel, or your little stone cottage? How do you get heat? You gotta burn firewood, right? Because you don't have oil, you don't have, other, sources, you don't have natural gas at that point. Well, you do, but you don't have a way to channel it, really. So you use, like, firewood. So you gotta go out into the woods, you gotta get a bunch of firewood, you gotta chop it and whatever. And the general idea here is that a lot of salamanders, these little tiny lizard dudes, they would just chill out around the firewood. So imagine you go get some kindling or some firewood to throw on your, fireplace or whatever. You pick up a big haul of it. There are some salamanders hanging out in there you don't know about. You walk back in, you throw everything into the fire, and then these salamanders are like, holy crap! And they start popping out of your fireplace, running all over the place. And you're like, from the perspective of primitive man, holy crap! These animals, these tiny little lizard salamander things just literally popped out of the fire. And the Greek name for them is literally just fire lizard. Now, they're cold-blooded, so it's not like they're gonna die immediately, but they jumped out and they're like, oh, fire, whatever, what the hell are you doing? You're just trying to take a nap in here. So, yeah, that's most likely where it started, and it just became a prevalent thing where people would talk about it. It's like, hey, man, I lit a fire last night, and these lizards came popping out of the hearth. I'm like, oh, you too? It happened to me! It happened to me, too! Holy crap! Yeah, I guess we got some deities or some mythical creatures on our hands here, Let's check the Bible for this. Fire lizard. We need to add some parts, So yeah, the salamander though, in the terms of like black clover, I mentioned that it's a fire spirit. It's a familiar that clings to a very particularly strong or worthy fire mage, and you know you can use like you could summon the actual entity of the salamander to go and fight on your behalf, or it can summon flames and augment your own magic, that kind of shit. So if we're gonna do that, I could probably out of everything, you know, before we get to the realm of deities, I would, you know, be okay with King, the wildfire, receiving the power of the mythical, you know, I guess it would be, well, actually, we've already seen this kind of before. The salamander fruit with Caesar's pet Smiley, the giant glob of goo on Punk Hazard. That was, he had the Saru no Mi model axolotl. All right, and the axolotl is an amphibious lizard, you know, salamander, and yeah, it can actually exist in water and on land, which actually makes it the very first devil fruit ability that turns you into an animal that can live underwater, but it doesn't because devil fruit weaknesses and stuff. So it's actually, this has already been established. We already have the Saru no Mi as a thing that's canon. In that case, it would be the salamander fruit model salamander, you know, so maybe you want to switch it up a little bit there, but you can make it work. You can have it like, no, it's not just a regular salamander that's just a boring little lizard that just chills out on your hand. No, this thing is a fire elemental, so to speak. Like you can actually turn into this thing, and you know, King can like crawl around with it. King does have wings. I mean, if they're real wings, then maybe the salamander might have wings. I mean, traditionally they don't, but then again, it's Oda's manga. If he really wants to give a salamander wings, just to be that way, it can maybe look at like sort of like a lesser dragon. Because so far, from what I'm looking at here, we have Kaido, who is the captain of the Beast Pirates. We have Orochi, but Orochi's not like off, he's not part of the crew, you know, he's like just kind of like in cahoots with Kaido. So if we're just excluding Orochi, wouldn't King naturally be Kaido's number 2? Now, there is an exception to this, and that is this. We haven't found out about this yet. The Ace card. Jack was the Jack, Queen was the Queen, King was the King. I wonder who's the 10. Probably X Drake, because 10, Diaz Drake, yeah, that's about right. Maybe he's the 10. But, what about the Ace? Now, first off, Ace, there's already been an Ace in the hole once in this series, or the hole in the Ace once in this series, okay? But no, okay. You could just say Kaido is the Ace and call it a day. You know, you could just make it Ace. Oh yeah, Ace. Kaido's the Ace. Done. Easy. Or you could say there's somebody else waiting in the wings. That Kaido has a number 2 that's directly underneath him and right above King. You know, so you have the 3 calamities, then you have one more person, and then you have Kaido himself. Who you could also say Kaido is the actual player. He's the one that's actually the dealer of the cards. All right, or yeah, he could fit as the Ace slot too. Doflamingo fit as the Joker. You could see what Oda's going with here, having the whole layout of the playing cards and everything. And you have like Gene Rummy, who's also, it's the name of a card game, so that's the whole motive here we're going with here. So yeah, let me know what you think about this. Would you be okay with just making Kaido the Ace, or he's like, no, there might be one more person? I guess it really all depends on King. You know, if we get to see what King is capable of, and we're like, okay, yeah, he's powerful, like, he's turns into a winged salamander that's flying around and torching entire towns, I'm like, oh, he's like a lesser dragon, like, okay, yeah, he's number 2, that makes sense. And he does have a sword, and the reason that that's important is because Zoro is usually the one that fights the number 2, Luffy fights number 1. We might mix things up in this arc, though, because it's not probably going to be a one-on-one fight between Luffy and Kaido, but, you know, it looks like King with the sword probably going to face off against Zoro, I would assume. So, yeah, we'll see that there. So, yeah. Let's move on now to, I want to go back to King at one point, because we're going to be bringing up the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, so I got to bring that up. But let's address Queen right now. So Queen is a fat, balding man with an epic mustache and kind of like a bald on the top of his head, but also has got a ponytail, also possibly an Okama because of the lipstick. So Queen is the plague. What does that mean? Now, this is kind of complicated because I was trying to find a mythical creature that really just embodied disease or the plague or sickness in general. It would make this a lot easier if it was just a paramecia. make it the disease fruit, the plague fruit. Anything you touch withers and dies of a horrible illness, whether it be a plant or a human. If you touch a human, maybe it depends on how long you touch them. That would make it easy, but like I said, we're trying to stick with the zone layout here of the crew. And the thing with that is, there are mythical creatures and like demons and the like, and gods even, or things that are considered gods that just embody disease as one of their aspects. But more than anything, they're gods of death. You know, so when you're talking about something like the Grim Reaper represents like a symbol of disease and plague. They used it all the time back during the Black Death in the 14th century in London. This is my big book of history. So yeah, the Black Death in Europe, 1347. There were a few bouts of the Black Death. That's something that, it wasn't just one thing. There was the one moment that wiped out like 30% of Europe. That was a big deal. 30 to 60% of Europe, actually. So that was obviously a big deal. But the plague did not just die out there. There was like its big thing, and then it died, and then it came back, and then it died, and it came back, died, it came back, and it was stretching all the way up to like the 17th century and a little bit beyond that. There were still outbreaks of the plague. Even currently, even nowadays in the world, every now and then you'll get somebody that has bubonic plague. I remember reading a story once a few years back of a Chinese guy that ate some roadkill, and it was infected with it, and he ended up getting fucking bubonic plague. How would you hate to go to the doctor and be like, yeah, doctor, I just don't feel good. I can't sleep. I got these pustules. Yeah, you got bubonic plague, so we're gonna quarantine you for a little while, you know? But you know, the skeleton with the scythe and the hooded figure, that was such a symbol of death and plague and pestilence at that point. Also cholera. A lot of cholera going on in London in particular, you know? So, that's what came to me arriving as like, well, you know, you could maybe pick maybe a little bit more of an obscure demon, because there is a demon by the name of Erekio. This demon is kind of a lesser-known Greek figure, and it is really just like the physical embodiment, sometimes not even physical embodiment. It can actually just represent diseased air. So it doesn't even have a physical form. It's just the diseased air that's about. That's Oreko. That's the god of disease, in a sense. Because, once again, back then they didn't understand. They understood that it's probably something in the air that's making you sick, but they didn't understand, like, bacteria yet. So, a lot of actually times what a doctor would say to cure the Black Plague would be, you know, get out of the city and go to the country where you can breathe clean air. And while this might not have cured somebody that has bubonic, people that took this advice and left the city actually were better off, because the city was just a breeding ground for this shit. So yeah, you had to avoid all that stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was the Grim Reaper that was the representation, all that. So I could see Queen having that. In fact, I could see it being really freaking scary. Like Queen activating his devil fruit, and then you just imagine like the skin melting off his freaking body, and just, and then there's just like a skull underneath, and it's just like the skeleton pops out, and then Brooke is like, "Oh, you're a skeleton too, yo, you're terrifying," you know? It's like maybe Brooke would be scared of the skeleton. That would be funny. Like, out of all the Straw Hats observing this, Brooke is the one that freaks out. Like, it's a skeleton! But once again, you might think that's a little bit overkill, a little bit OP to just become the personification of death itself, so yeah. Something else I looked at was the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse spoken of in Revelations. We have the Pale Horse of Death, the Red Horse of War, which could also call back to King, because the red horse represents fire, or, you know, just blood, and then you have King with the flames, so maybe something to go on there. Maybe King can transform into the War Horse, I don't know. You also had the Black Horse of Famine, and then the White Horse of Pestilence, also sometimes referred to as the White Horse of Conquest. It seems like in the more biblical senses, and like if you're actually reading Revelations, it's the Horsemen of Conquest. When you're talking more about popular culture, stuff in books, stuff in movies, video games, it's usually the Horse of pestilence. That's it. So pestilence, like disease and everything. And if you actually look, the four horsemen, that kind of stacks up with the calamities in Kaido. Jack representing the black horse of famine. So Jack comes up and stomps out all the greenery and ruins your fields and your crops, and then so you know, starvation. Queen represents pestilence, plague, disease, that kind of stuff. Then you have King that represents, fire. So the war horse comes in, blazing fury, that kind of stuff. Also, if you ever played Red Dead Redemption, the first game, I haven't played the second yet. It's on my to-do list. You can, tame all the horses in that game, and the war horse is this awesome fire blaze. I always had the war horse because you can run down zombies and everything in the DLC, and the zombies just get lit on fire. It's awesome. So, and then you could have Kaido maybe representing the pale horse of death, because Kaido is just the massive overlay. He just deals out death. He doesn't care. He's a dragon, Did I mention that? He's a dragon. So yeah. If that's the case, then there's that. But other things people have said is like, okay, what if we scale it back a little bit, though, and have it more about insects? Because the thing that started the Black Death was most likely fleas on rats. People thought it was rats for a long time, but it was more like the fleas that were infecting the rats of bubonic. So, also, locusts, flies. You can, like, Beelzebub, king of flies. Oh, wait, no, that's Shia Poof's ability in Hunter x Hunter, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, the whole idea the devil is like the lord of flies. There's a reason he is, because flies bring disease and pestilence. So, yeah, maybe you could have him turn into that. Now, there hasn't been that many insect-themed devil fruits. We saw the two, the beetle fruit and the hornet fruit that were used by the Tontatas. But we haven't really seen... we also have the spider one. Spiders aren't insects, but you know what I mean, like an arachnid fruit, kind of in the same idea here. A little tiny being and, giant devil fruit, because Onigumo could get, like, the spider legs coming out of him and all that stuff. So, with that being said, what about Queen having a scorpion fruit? People have pointed out that the mustache and the ponytail kind of resembles a scorpion's claws, and it's a tail stinger, so maybe something like that. Anything the stinger pierces, gets infected with some horrible, something like that. I'm a little bit more hesitant about the locust fly thing. Like, it would be cool to see Queen just disapparate into a cloud of flies and just going around and infecting everybody, but we've never seen devil fruits working that way. Maybe with a paramecia you could get away with it, but I don't think that's the way Oda's going to go with it. So if we're going to pick anything here, I would probably go with the scorpion theory for believability. Even so, Oda might still spin it to be a mythical kind of variant of the scorpion in some ways. Native American tribes and mythology attached to them. They were living out in the deserts of North America. They have stuff tied to certain animals out there and insects, so that could tie something back into that. You can make it work. Like, I'm a scorpion. I can poison you, and I can also... I don't know, shoot lightning from my claws. You could figure out something. But even so, turning into a giant scorpion, that would be pretty devastating as well. And I'm not the first person to come up with the scorpion thing. Like I said, the idea, like, people have actually pointed out to me, it's like, hey, the mustache and the ponytail. I'm like, oh yeah, it kind of does look like a scorpion, yeah. I'm still gonna kind of go with my Queen turning into a lich kind of deal, the flesh melting off, skull underneath. That would be pretty damn cool, but I guess we already have one skeleton in One Piece so far, so do we really need two talking skeletons? I think the only answer to that is yes, So, yeah, that's what I got for you. King could either become Hephaestus or more likely a salamander, and then you can have Queen turning into a skeleton or some type of insect that could spread disease. Or fleas, that too. Giant flea, super jumping ability, that would be neat. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Learn how to do card tricks. I tried to learn a little while ago, and I kind of got bored and just went away. Then I learned how to try to build a house of cards, and, yeah, not too great at that either. I'm not cut out for this. Have a great night, everybody. Tekking, signing out.